numerous work sessions over the last number of months, developing, giving staff direction for what's before you today. We hope that by being able to respond to concerns that you expressed, we can finalize a budget adequate for your consideration on first reading on June 2nd. We've identified some topics today that may impact the budget either prior to June 2nd or certainly as we progress through the year. So we would like to go through those topics and then we want to make sure we leave adequate time to respond to any questions or concerns that you might have. Unless there are some questions in that regard, we'll get started. The first item we have a presentation to you today is an update on what's going on legislatively at the federal and at the state levels because those things are impacting our budget and our planning for next year and into the future. Mr. Tony McEwen, our legislative and community governmental affairs person, will present that section. Tony?
Morning, everybody. Hope y'all can hear me through the mask, and apologize for the uncut hair. I would trust my wife to do it, but if I did, I'd end up with a mohawk and be here in front of you with a mohawk this morning, I think. But hope everybody's doing well. What I was asked to do is give a basic understanding of legislative action at the state and federal level, and especially action that relates to budget and finance issues. And revenue issues. And so let me first say that there's a ton of this that is completely up in the air right now. And so I think a lot of it will get worked out within the next month. We'll have a lot better idea of what's going to be taking place. But let me kind of give you a brief presentation and answer any questions that you may have. First off, I want to talk about what's been done, what is kind of on the table and being worked on now, and kind of what's at stake related to future actions. First off, I'm going to deal with the federal issues. As I've told you previously, there's been multiple bills passed. We've had 3 large COVID-19 response packages. The biggest and most impactful to local governments and state governments remains the CARES Act. And just to remind you, that was passed into late March. That was a $2 trillion bill. That's the bill that had stimulus checks that went out to individuals, increases in unemployment, but also within that, it had $25 billion for local transit as an example, and WAVE got $6.8 million of that. There was $150 billion that went to state and municipalities. However, that was laid out in a way to where it only went directly to cities with a population of 500,000 or more. So you're talking about in North Carolina, only the city of Charlotte, Wake County, Mecklenburg County, Guilford County, all got direct allocations from that. And I'll get into some. There's a considerable amount more money of that $150 billion that remains out there, and I'll touch on that just a little bit in a moment. Also, the city did get a direct allocation of CDBG dollars, $612,000 as part of the CARES Act. Like I said, there is funding in this program for local governments, but we do not have access to those funds yet. And I'll, like I said, touch on that in the state section. Right now at the congressional level, there's very much consensus building around the need for a 4th COVID-19 relief package. And that's kind of where the consensus ends at that point, is the fact that something else needs to be done. As it relates to state and local governments, both House leadership and the president have publicly expressed in the past a willingness to support additional funding to the state and local governments. The Senate leadership thus far has not expressed the same preference, although there are some actions that they're taking, I think, that ultimately will benefit local governments, which I'll touch on. First off, on the 4th package, the House leadership has already taken a step in that effort with passage of the HEROES Act just recently. Senate leaders have indicated they're going to start a 4th bill in June with the hopes of passing it by July 4th. I think that may be a little bit idealistic. And some key officials within the Senate have advocated for an infrastructure package to be the lead of that fourth relief bill. But as it relates to the HEROES Act, that's a large $3 trillion bill that mostly passed along party lines recently. And just as an example of what that would mean if that was ultimately taken up in the Senate and passed and supported by the president, for city of Wilmington alone, it would be completely flexible funds in the year 2020 to the tune of $49 million. And in 2021, it would be nearly $25 million that would come directly to the city of Wilmington alone. Like I said, it's passed the House, mostly along party lines, and the Senate has indicated strongly that they will not be taking up that package. So I think that's kind of a jumping off point for negotiations to start. What the Senate is talking about doing is discussing providing states and cities more leeway in how they spend the $150 billion that was already allocated as part of the CARES Act. And that is especially critical because right now, those dollars really lack any real flexibility to be used creatively and as revenue replacement for cities. Once that happens, and there is an anticipation that that's going to happen, I would say it's probably a better than 50-50 chance is that at the state level, that then frees up $150 million that would be divided. We don't know how exactly that would be divided. You know, most people I think would think per capita, but that's $150 million that would be divided among cities throughout North Carolina, discluding Charlotte, because they already got the direct allocation, as I mentioned previously. So you can see where that would be a considerable resource that would come to cities to replace revenue that was lost as a result of the economic pain that's been caused by this pandemic. So on the federal level, what we ultimately need as cities is we need several things from Congress. We need flexibility, as I said, in the spending for the current CARES Act funding and additional aid to states and local governments that has flexibility within it. And if we get that flexibility as a result of the amended CARES Act, like I said, there would be considerable funding that would be freed up to assist cities. Recently, Mayor Saffo participated in a town hall with Senator Tillis, and we were pleased to hear Senator Tillis at that point in time, based on a question he had received from the audience, express support for that flexibility. So it appears as if we have an ally within the Senate here in our state delegation. Moving on to the state level, there's going to be a new revenue outlook report coming. I think it was initially promised by the end of this week, and unless I've missed it, it has not materialized yet. And so we may be seeing that sometime today or early next week. That report or outlook will be done in conjunction with the governor's office and General Assembly staff. Obviously, there's unknown impact to items like occupancy tax and vehicle property tax, and everything at this point is very much a projection. And that's going to set the stage for exactly what the key points are for the General Assembly. They're in session right now. They started in force earlier this week, and they'll be coming back for the weeks to come. There's a little bit of disagreement between the House and the Senate as far as, you know, kind of what the plan is. I think the House wants to come in and deal with some immediate issues related to elections and what have you, and then adjourn, wait for the kind of revenue picture to clear up and what the needs would be at that point, come back into session. I think the Senate, as opposed to that, is interested in just kind of keeping a consistent time in session for the foreseeable future. So right now, what they're estimating at the state level is a $4 billion shortfall, which does not include the funding crisis at the DOT level, which is an estimated additional $1 billion. So we've got that to contend with. In an effort to assist, I think, small business, individual taxpayers, the General Assembly is delaying and deferring several points of revenue. So what I would, on that front, for instance, there's a number of waiver of penalties on late sales tax payments. There's deferral of vehicle registrations and thus the payment of vehicle property tax for 6 months. That alone is about $200 million statewide. And so hopefully that's something that will arrive in 6 months from now or within that time frame. And then there's, in addition to that, another example is the executive order to prevent utility disconnections that the governor put in place. Related to North Carolina Department of Transportation, I know what I've heard is that there is going to be a potential reduction across the board of 25% to PAL bill funding as well as state aid for transit. at the local level. I've seen that estimate be 15 to 25%, but what I've heard from my contacts is prepare for a 25% cut. Um, the big issues right now, as it relates to local governments, especially at the state level, again, there's been 3 rounds of federal aid, and for COVID thus far, CARES Act being the main one. Um, as far as what went to our state, there's COVID related expenses for local and state governments reimbursement. 3 counties and 1 city got over $430 million directly from the U.S. Treasury. Otherwise, all others have to rely on the General Assembly to appropriate the federal aid to local government. And to their credit, the General Assembly has taken steps in that regard. Ultimately, they have $3.5 billion available to them through the CARES Act that are state and local government aid funding. So what they've done is they've set aside about $300 million in a reserve, anticipating flexibility for the CARES Act at the congressional level. Of that $3.5 billion. $150 million has already been sent to counties for the purpose of covering expenses specifically related to the COVID-19 response. Within that legislation, it stressed that counties may assist cities within their county with those funds. New Hanover County, as an example, received $4 million as part of the CARES Act funding, and that went through the state legislature, and they are working through the process of exactly how they're going to divide that up. And again, that money is to be spent in direct relation to COVID-19 response action. The remaining $150 million, like I said, is held in a reserve account for cities, awaiting that flexibility from Congress. So again, I know I've said that multiple times. That is the key thing that we're waiting for, is an amended CARES Act at the congressional level that would free up that $150 million. And like I said, Senator Tillis has expressed support for that. I have not heard Senator Burr take a stance on that, but I am relatively confident that ultimately that is going to take place. Also, related to the issue of DOT, there's $300 million for North Carolina DOT that is set aside in reserve fund awaiting that flexibility as well. So, yes, sir, $300 million.
Tony,
Which would not be the end all be all to NCDOT issues, but certainly would make a dent in that.
Tony,
Yes, sir.
I just want to make sure I got this right. So the state received $3.5 billion.
Specific to state and local government aid, there's more money beyond that. I think we're about $6 billion total for the CARES Act in North Carolina.
And then they set aside $300 million for local governments.
150 million for counties, 150 million for cities, excluding the most populous cities and counties.
So out of that 300 million, 150 was sent to the counties, 150 is sent to cities.
Yes, sir.
But we're going to get, but the 4.1 million that was given in the CARES Act to the county of New Hanover was separate from the 150 million that's coming to cities.
Yes, sir.
So out of that 4.1 million, obviously the county, I think, has taken some specific action to give us some of that money. The other 150 million, has that already been dispersed that's supposed to go to cities?
No, it's sitting in a reserve fund. So there is, I think, probably a good $1.5 billion sitting in reserve funds. I think I've got that figure right. Roughly, that's the case. That the state legislature passed in some of the initial legislation that they laid out. So it's just literally just sitting in a reserve fund in anticipation and an amended CARES Act at the congressional level. And so once that amended CARES Act takes place, that will free up that money to flow directly to cities and be flexible to use how we see fit, as I understand it, unless there's a change in that at the federal level.
Okay, and then the 3 counties and the 1 city that got in the first round that got direct allocation.
Wake, Guilford, and Mecklenburg.
Wake, Guilford, and Mecklenburg, and then the city that got it?
Charlotte.
Charlotte. So will they get any
They will
additional
not.
funding from the 150 million that's parked?
It's my understanding is they will not.
And is this money distributed based on per capita, how is it distributed?
We don't know yet. I think most people would guess it's per capita, and the only reason I highlight Meck, Wake, Guilford, and Charlotte, not to say that they're not deserving of any future assistance, obviously they are, but just to make the point that when you say $150 million and you X out the most populous city in the state by far, obviously that makes the piece of the pie bigger for all the other cities that remain.
Do we know what the allocation was to Charlotte?
Off the top of my head, I do not.
How
I
about
do
the
not.
3 other counties?
I do not. I'll get
Okay.
that information
All right.
to you. I think it was in excess of $100 million. I think it was, if I remember correctly, I'll get you the exact figure. But if my recollection
Okay.
serves me okay, I think it's about 140 million that Charlotte has gotten so
Okay.
far.
And so the amended, I know that they're working on it in Washington to hopefully make the amendment to the law. Is time frame?
So that's exactly what I was about to say.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. It's okay. You're spot on with your question. The expenditure deadline for the current CARES Act money is the end of this year. So in terms of timing for additional funding, it would be ideal to see progress made sometime in the May, June, July time period. Certainly before they take a recess. I think as you get closer to the election, other issues come to the forefront, and this may not be as burning of an issue as it is now. But this is a big topic of conversation. That there's, if you watch cable news, which would drive you crazy right now, but if you watch cable news, this isn't really a back burner issue. This is a pretty important issue to the general public as far as just the amount of time that's spent on news discussing.
And just reiterate again, the House was okay with making the amendment, but the Senate still is grappling with it.
Yes, the House has expressed interest in doing that and additional funding. The Senate, I think probably best case scenario, what we can hope for right now with the U.S. Senate is that they would provide that flexibility.
Okay.
They have not at this point expressed any interest in additional funding beyond what's already been put in place. And frankly, a lot of what you hear from Senate leadership is there are things that I think would ultimately benefit states and cities. Again, like I said, Senator Lindsey Graham is pushing President Trump to implement a strong infrastructure bill as part of the fourth relief package. Obviously, that's something that would be beneficial and something that the city of Wilmington has long advocated for, a robust infrastructure bill at the federal level. But I think a lot of where the Senate leadership's head is at the federal level is they want to see, give it a little bit and see what the reopening means for the economy and for revenues to state and local governments, and then maybe take action at that point.
And finally, real just quick.
Yes, sir.
As far as the lobbying efforts from the Metro mayors, the North Carolina League of Municipalities, I would imagine the North Carolina League of County Commissioners, all of these entities are all, I guess, advocating and talking to our federal representatives, Senator Burr, Senator Tillis, and obviously in our particular case here locally, Congressman Rouser.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And even more importantly, what I would add on to that is the Association of County Commissioners here in North Carolina is formally on board. One of the concerns early on, in fairness to the state legislature, their hands were pretty tied with the direction
Sure.
that came down from the CARES Act related to flexibility and who can get direct allocations. It was set up to be, I think, a troubling situation between counties and cities here in North Carolina, that counties got it, cities didn't get it, and counties have already got their money. I know New Hanover County has been very willing to work with the city, to their credit. But Association of County Commissioners, which they've got a lot of juice at the state legislature right now, they have been very much working in unity with the North Carolina League of Municipalities and Metro mayors in formal and in informal ways.
Thank you. Wait a minute, Mr. Anderson has a question.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Anderson.
Tank, on a couple of those things, what was the time when you talked to Tillis or his office, or what was that before this HEROES Act had passed or after in the House?
It was, I think, within days after, or right at that. It's been very recently that we did this town hall.
Okay, and that was kind of, I mean, that's been in the press that they want to wait and kind of see where to fill in, maybe fill in the holes, so to speak. But
I'll say, I don't think that waiting, what they're saying about waiting to see what the revenue picture is and what the outcomes are in the short term with the reopening, I think that's independent from the anticipated flexibility they would grant to the CARES Act. When I said waiting, I was saying, and forgive me,
get to that one.
Additional bills.
The HEROES. So I do, and it's been so recent, you may not, but I know the president had some restaurant crowd. They're trying to maybe, sounds like they're trying to, what did we miss the first couple times? Mm-hmm. Same here. I saw where Senator Peterson has sponsored something along those lines at the state level. I mean, is there any, can you do you have anything to add? What maybe to any of that? Is there any traction for Senator Peterson's bill, or do you? I mean, it made sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's got
But
some
he's
good
in the
support.
minority, so I don't know. Is anybody on the other side to go in with him, or?
There are a number of bills out there from folks that are influential that are in both the minority, like Senator Peterson, as well as folks that are influential that are in the majority in Raleigh right now that have, there's several separate restaurant bills. There's some that relate to outdoor dining. There's some that relate to getting direct funding assistance in the form of grants or loans to restaurant and lodging entities. I think ultimately what you're going to see is something's going to happen, and I think it's going to be piecemeal from different bills. I'll tell you, like, for
They
example,
both just seem to be really left out of the way their businesses work and everything. They just, I mean, not that it was intentional, but just kind of the way, and they're the most hurt. So,
yeah,
as you know, we're just now reopening hotels, restaurants.
yeah,
So I'm just hopeful.
yeah. Same here, and I'll say that the Restaurant Lodging Association, which is one of the more powerful associations in North Carolina, groups like Visit NC. I know they're at the table with both the majority and minority party working on something. So I personally would be pretty surprised, to your point of the great need to assist restaurants and that type of thing during all
Hotels.
this. I'd be surprised if something doesn't materialize. Ultimately. I think some of the bills that I think would be most likely to come through have some items attached to them that would make it very difficult for them to be supported on a bipartisan manner. For instance, there's some pieces of legislation that would be viewed as assistful to restaurants and bars and hotel motel that have preemptions of the governor's executive order attached to them.
In other words, it'd have to go away before they. So
seeking basically to take away the governor's power to continue with how the executive order currently is written out as it relates to bars and gyms and that type of thing. I think that that's when it starts to become a little bit partisan. I think the things that just are meant purely as an assist to restaurants and lodging owners, that I think ultimately something's going to materialize with that. I'm sorry I was long-winded. I hope that answered your question, but.
No, I just, you know, you sometimes are hearing it closer to the horse's mouth versus a lot of times you read one article in the press, the next article is just the same. It's just, and it's very, very high level. I was just curious. You use the word flexibility, and that's what, in your mind, what does that mean? I mean, the ability for a city to use money for, I mean, whatever the need is. I mean, because I think, you know, we're getting emails and it's going to start, you know, I think especially in June, you're going to start getting, people are going to start getting rent. No, I mean, you're in default, and that's going to be people have let it go. But, you know, I was listening to NPR come in, and it's that people are getting them now. So, I mean, it's all of a sudden we're going to have residential, commercial. I mean, I don't know what our role is really, but is that the kind of thing that you're thinking flexibility wise, or just more how we spend it on city functions?
Well, I think right now we've been very much handcuffed to the funds have to be spent in a certain way in response to the pandemic. And one of the big opportunities that may spring to mind and obviously it's up to cities and counties across the state how they opt to spend whatever funding may or may not be coming their way. But one of the big issues that rises front of mind that I hear a lot of cities talk about is the need to replace lost revenue, and ensure that you don't have to furlough workers, and you can have public safety in place adequately, and what have you. And so right now there's no resources coming to either the state or local governments that bears in mind the high costs of lost revenue and what all the domino effects beyond that. But ultimately, I think it's the flexibility will allow cities to respond. You know, it may be a program that what you were alluding to, that I think ultimately the flexibility with funding will allow you as an elected representative in your city to make those decisions. But right now, the money it's not flowing in that way to where we have that flexibility. So much so that the state legislature has just pumped the brakes on it and said we've got to set this aside because this is not going to work for how cities and counties need to respond.
There's numerous bills with numerous names. You know, the Senate, there's state, federal. So I got a little lost. The one on was it the Heroes bill that you talked about with the 300 million for, or was that CARES?
That's the CARES Act.
So there's 300 million in that for DOT.
Yes, sir. It's so that money came through the CARES Act to the state. The state allotted that amount. Like, I don't know if I don't believe the CARES Act said, all right, the formula we've set up, 300 million of this needs to go to NCDOT. That's what the state legislature sliced out from that pot of money that they got that can benefit state and local governments, which again was about $3.5 billion just for that part of the CARES Act that flowed through North Carolina. So they decided on the $300 million cutout that they put in a reserve awaiting flexibility.
And does that number basically kind of help them pay their people, or is it actually might free up some projects? I mean, do you know what kind of, I mean, is that I know you said that's not an end all, but I mean, what is it? I mean, where does it help? I mean, I had that down to ask you about to start with before I even heard that was the situation with DOT is bad. And just when I heard 300 million, I'm like, does that help us, or is that just Band-Aid?
I mean, that barely gets them, I think, to what their cash floor was that was laid out in statutes previously. So obviously $300 million is $300 million. That would be a ton of assistance to NCDOT, but that comes nowhere near solving the problem short term nor long term that I understand it.
We just kind of barely touched on this, but the way we do those legislative breakfasts, we don't ever give them any time to actually respond to anything. It's like we load them up with stuff and then say bye. I'm not sure I'd love to have some more time in the future to maybe less issues and let them respond, because I don't get anything out of it. I just tell them something and then you don't know if it's, so I'm curious. I mean, I think Ms. Grain said something to the effect of they have some committee, but I've just seen heard no real progress. You know, there's ideas floated out there, but it's been going on for years. How are they they've got to change how we fund DOT. And I know that the focus is on COVID, but hopefully we can, I'm so stupid, walk and chew gum, whatever. We got to keep working on that. They can't just, you think when they come back after this COVID session, I mean, is that on a front burner or still just in a room somewhere, just a pie in the sky committee?
And I know that during our legislative breakfast, you were correct to throw out the number of questions you did about transportation and your concern over that locally and statewide. As you saw, there was not a lot of substance in their response, and you know, and credit to them, there wasn't much that they could say. I think that the lead up to this session has been handled by leadership a lot. And I'm not sure that every legislator and senator, regardless of what party they're with, has been in on the planning on everything. And I don't think even the leaders have an idea of what they're going to do with transportation right now. I heard a report where one of the top transportation committee members in the legislature didn't know what they were going to do with it. And it's become a partisan football as well. You know, there was a very public audit that was released by Beth Wood, our state auditor, that was critical of Department of Transportation financial practices. And not just, it was made very clear, this was just a couple of days ago where she was brought before a committee and questioned on this issue. She made very clear it wasn't just this administration. This is something that had been going back years and years and years, and there were fundamental issues that needed to be worked on. There's been a change in leadership at the state DOT level as well, but I have not seen or heard from any legislators where there's a concrete plan to address this. I think that her presentation maybe diffuse a little bit of the partisan rancor around it, but it's still a pretty partisan issue right now, and I think that's maybe hindering some well thought out plans. I'll just say that.
Well, keep us posted on that, please.
Yes, sir. Absolutely will. I appreciate your passion on it, but I absolutely will. And to that point, the last thing I'll really say is that not only are we hearing strong indications at the federal level of an infrastructure bill as part of further relief efforts, but at the state level, there appears to be bipartisan agreement around the need for an infrastructure bond. I know what's kind of come out of the minority party in Raleigh right now is about $3.9 billion. Obviously, borrowing is a lot cheaper now than it's been historically, and so a lot of folks view it as a good opportunity to borrow money and invest it in our state infrastructure and transportation, but as well a opportunity to rebuild the economy. And Speaker Moore has voiced support for about a $1.9 billion bond package. I shouldn't have said transportation earlier. I think it's pretty strictly infrastructure, a lot of public school funding, college construction needs, water and sewer infrastructure, things like North Carolina zoos, museum, that type of thing. And we're going to see some bipartisan legislation released in the coming days that will relate to elections. That's one of the top priorities right now. Is election security and funding around that. So we're going to see a pretty robust program. The issue of what businesses were and were not included in the executive order is a big deal right now at the legislature. There's a good amount of back and forth on that, and so that's pretty much been dominating the state legislature right now. So with that said, that's what I got. Hopefully that
Can I
helps.
ask a question? I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, Tony, it's Kevin.
Hey.
Thank you for all those numbers. They all went right over my head. I don't know how you keep them in your head. I do have one in my mind, though. The very first one you mentioned, $600,000 CDBG funds, but we have no access yet. When will we have access? Do you have any idea?
Let me, and I know you're going to hear from Suzanne in a moment. We do have access, and I know she's working through a plan. I may be mistaken, but we do have access to those funds.
Oh, I thought I had written down no access yet, but okay. All right, then I'll ask her and Laura which budget that comes into, whether it's this year or is it part of our discussion of next year. All right, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Tony, thank you. Any other questions for Tony? Okay, thank you, Tony.
Thank you all.
Cheatham?
Mr. Mayor, we'll continue the discussion of federal funding and specifically Councilman O'Grady's concern about CARES Act. Suzanne Rogers now will talk about the CARES Act, where it is and what our preliminary thoughts and thinking it may be in regards to eligibility for funding.
Ms. Rogers here. There you go. Suzanne, welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Members of council. Sarah, do I advance the slides or? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Laura. Okay, this is an update on where we are with the CDBG supplemental funding that came about as part of the CARES Act. As Tony explained, the CARES Act made available $5 billion on supplemental funding for CDBG across the nation to entitlement cities and counties. So the city received an allocation of $612,032 based on our FY 2021 formula. So grantees must identify the use of the funds, and the funds must be used to prevent, prepare for, or respond to the coronavirus. Also, we're required to prevent the duplication of benefits. So that means, of course, the grant funds may not be used to pay the cost if there's another source of financial assistance available to pay for an eligible cost, including other CARES Act programs. So eligible uses of the funds, like all CDBG funds, they must benefit low to moderate income persons or communities. Public service is an eligible use, and that includes lots of services, homeless services, youth services, elderly services, those kinds of things. So they must be new or increased services, again, that respond to the coronavirus. And that also includes limited emergency assistance of no more than 3 months. Public facilities are eligible uses. Those are not government facilities, but public facilities that are open to the public and providing services. And that is for testing, treatment, or quarantine. Business assistance is eligible for the creation of jobs for the manufacture of medical supplies related to the COVID-19, or to retain jobs that are held by low to moderate income. And micro enterprise loans or grants are also eligible uses. And that's for very, very small businesses that provide services such as food delivery, cleaning, that type of thing. The CARES Act also provided some flexibility with CDBG funds to make it easier to use those funds, and as well as our 2019 funds, that's our current year funds, and our 2020 funds, next year's funds. So they've allowed for us to request some waivers, and here are some of the flexibilities. The act eliminates the 15% public service cap. So typically with CDBG funds, you can only use up to 15% for public services. So this eliminates that. It allows reimbursement of eligible costs incurred prior to the CARES Act. So if there are COVID-related costs that occurred prior to the March 27th, we could use the funds for that. And it allows for a waiver of citizen participation and public hearing notice time. Currently, for any sort of a substantial amendment, we have at least a 15-day public comment period, and this would allow us to reduce that to 5 days notice. And it allows us to amend our current year plan or next year's plan, whichever makes more sense. And for most cities, it would be the current year plan, and that's true for us. So we can amend our current year plan and still utilize those funds into the next year. So in thinking of preparing to bring forward a recommendation for how these funds might be allocated within the community, we consulted with our nonprofits and community partners. We sent out a questionnaire to over 50 of them and asked them to share that questionnaire within their networks as well. So we wanted to determine the impact of COVID-19 on their program service delivery. We had 35 responses. You can see here the breakdown: 11 from agencies that are providing some sort of food assistance on site, food banks, food pantries, other sorts of feeding programs on site. 8 responses from organizations that provide some sort of educational services, after school services, that type of thing. 11 responses from organizations providing housing and homeless services. 12 from agencies that are providing distribution of food and supplies and protective equipment, and then 6 in the other category. And some organizations are doing more than one of these things. So,
may I ask a quick question? I take it that this is for operational cost, and I think all of us were contacted by the food bank. Is there any way any of this can be used for a capital project, capital improvement?
I don't think that this is appropriate for a capital project, given the scope of the capital project that the food bank is trying to achieve. So, given that they're asking the city for $200,000 towards a multi-million dollar project, the timeline on that really doesn't, I think, fit within, responding to the immediate pandemic.
I think they're struggling to respond to it, but I understand.
Right, but and I understand that. Of the 35 respondents, 20 were offering expanded services and 16 were offering new services related to the COVID-19. So we also looked at what other cities were doing with their CDBG supplemental funding, looking at a poll that was done by the National Community Development Association, where they looked at 68 grantees from all over the country and found that the primary activities are direct rent or mortgage assistance, small business assistance, and then public services. And of those, here's a more detailed breakdown. 36 of the respondents towards direct rental and mortgage and utility assistance, 32 for assistance to small businesses, 28 for public services. We looked at some cities here in North Carolina who had already moved forward and had information available. We see that Charlotte is using their supplemental funds for a rental assistance program and micro business support program, and Raleigh for rental assistance and public services.
Suzanne, can I ask a question?
Certainly.
Where are we even thinking in that direction? I know I've been contacted by New Hanover for All, and I want to be able to give them something solid and point them in the right direction. So are we even thinking about rental assistance or mortgage assistance?
I have some slides coming up that I think will address that question.
Okay, so I'm being premature. Sorry.
No, not at all. You're right on point. Thank you.
Suzanne,
Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question. Could you go back 2 slides? I didn't want to interrupt you in your last couple of slides, but if you could go back right there. Of the 35 respondents, is the food bank one of those respondents?
Yes, the food bank is one of those respondents.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, Susan, this is Clifford, and I've had a chance to look at some of the things that Charlotte was doing, and I noticed one of the things that they were doing, they did a long stay hotel for homeless, and of course, as you mentioned, the mortgage assistance. I guess the question I'm going to ask, hopefully come up later on, is are we making sure that we're reaching, like, for example, people that are homeless and folks that really need the rent? And I'll ask that later though. It'll probably be in your presentation. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, thank you.
All right.
So, taking all that into consideration and what we understand to this point, the recommendations from community development staff on the anticipated use of these resources, we recommend that a portion of the funding, and I'll show you a breakdown in a few slides, a portion of the funding go towards educational services for children experiencing learning loss due to the distance learning in place. A portion of the funding go for homeless prevention, intervention, rental assistance, and utility assistance. It might also be discussed as rapid rehousing. And then a portion go for service delivery associated with the provision of food, protective personal equipment and supplies, and other coronavirus prevention services. So just a little more detail about that. So in using funding for educational services for low-income children, again, to address that, what's been called the COVID slide. We know that a lot of kids are expected to, have some learning loss during this period. And there are some organizations in our community that are implementing new programs or hoping to implement new programs to help address that. The homeless.
Could I just ask you, so I want to make sure I know what you're talking about. Go back one slide. Go back. Okay, so when we're talking about educational services, we already support Dreams, communities and schools. I'm sure there may be others. We're talking about perhaps enhancing the support we provide to those?
Correct. And that would be for new or increased services beyond what we are already supporting them for. So if they're bringing in new, more enhanced programs to deal with the learning loss.
So we could use our existing mechanism for providing community services to have those entities come to us and tell us what additional services they need and allocate money to them.
Correct.
Okay.
As we were discussing, homeless prevention or rapid rehousing rental assistance. And under the CDBG, this is emergency assistance. It can only be provided for up to 3 months. We would look at having a priority on prevention. So folks who are at risk of being evicted, assisting those folks as a top priority. Also some assistance with utilities. And the home regulations require that those payments obviously be made to the landlord or utility provider, we cannot make any direct income assistance payments to the low to moderate income family. And then service delivery associated with providing food and supplies. So we saw in the input that we got from the community partners, several of them had geared up food delivery and other service delivery and of supplies, cleaning supplies and cleaning services for those who were quarantined or unable to access these services.
Can I ask a question on that? So are we talking here about kind of reimbursing for extra services that have been provided, or we're talking about preparing for the future? Or both?
Well, we would be able to reimburse for services that have been provided and in the future as well. So both. Now that all is provided folks had an agreement with the city and the proper documentation.
Okay, well, several people have mentioned it already. The food bank has had a project. We haven't given it any real consideration this year, but they were pretty important during this the COVID matter. I mean, their increase in their food deliveries was substantial. They had to buy food. I mean, clearly they should be able to get some reimbursement. But the other side of that is, should we be helping them get prepared for the future? And of course, they've presented a project for that. And I think we need to be considering both of them.
The capital project you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay.
Susan, can I interrupt for a second? Just to remind the council that the $612,000 that we're talking about here, allocating is one-time money. Stimulus money intended to be spent within a specified period of time. That's driving a lot of the other criteria.
Thank you, Mr. Cheatham.
Suzanne, wait real quick. Can I just add that, for what you've explained here, and this just seems to be a lot of potential hands for not a lot of money. This is not a lot of money to, But 600,000, if you look at rental assistance or mortgage assistance and then everything else, this is just not a lot of money.
That is correct. And as Mr. Cheatham pointed out, this is a one-time supplement. The money was released or allocated in 2 tranches for HUD. So this was the first allocation of funds that went to entitlement cities. They've released the second allocation of that $5 billion that was set aside for HUD, and that does not go to entitlement cities. That just goes to the state. So we will not be getting, at least in the current CARES Act, any more supplemental CDBG funds. The state will, and it remains to be seen what the state, how the state will, allocate those funds.
Kevin, you done?
Yeah, I'm done
Suzanne,
for
I-
now.
all right. A little bit with Kevin here, and I'd love just get your feedback on it. Trying to think about what's the most glaring, and if you just think about what do people need? They need a roof and they need food. So, and I understand the slide prior very well because I have children that are in school and I've watched the last few months, and it varies greatly from grade to grade and school to school. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, our public schools weren't ready for this, and there's really been no education to speak of since March 13th, unless you have a homeschool type parent. That said, so little money, and knowing many of those great programs like Communities in Schools or whoever, it's just, I question the actual reach. Like, in other words, if we've got, I don't know how many, couldn't even begin, but just take New Hanover High School, just because I'm familiar with it, but multiply that times 10 or whatever it is. And you've got what, 30, whatever, 4,000, how many kids together? 1,400 kids, and we aren't even going to reach the 400 with, does that mean, in other words, we're just going to have this, a pocket of 12 people at Communities in Schools, Summit Rap. It's just our reach, while we're going to help a few, it just feels like maybe right now at this time, roof overhead, food and mouths is our reach takes priority, as scary as that is to say about the education piece. Yeah. And I guess that's a comment more than anything. I'd love your take on it. But the other piece is on the homeless, on the rent help. Do we use United? Who's going to be the pick and choose who gets? You follow me? Who's the screener in that scenario?
Right. So we are proposing to use a request for proposals to solicit our providers, and several organizations in the community have experience with rapid rehousing programs. So we don't know who it's going to be yet, because we have to have a fair, procurement process, but we think that there are capable organizations out there to do that. And
what do we, seems like my brain's a little clouded but is the United, what do we use them for some things like that in the past? What am I thinking of? Like, where they kind of see, maybe that was CFPUA, whatever. It was to help with people that couldn't pay certain bills, and I can't remember what that is. But so we'd put it out for proposals, and whoever looks the most competent to do it would. Okay, thank you. Could you address just how much reach you think we could get on the educational piece?
Well, I think obviously you have a very valid point. It's limited resources, and it will be a limited impact. We do know that some programs are being planned. that would probably be good candidates. You mentioned communities and schools who did not get funded for their Freedom School program is one example, and some other youth programs that are out there. But again, it's the wishes of council, what you all, how you want to allocate these funds.
Suzanne, let me ask a question, please. We talk about these groups like communities and schools and Dreams and others. How many people are they reaching right now? And what are their projections of that increase would be with increased funding from this pot of money? I mean, are we talking about a great deal or 1% more? I mean, how many are they reaching now and how effective is it?
I don't have that information with me today. I can get that for you about the level of their increase and their increase in services.
Yeah. Well, I go back to Sterling's comment. I knew exactly why he piped in there, and then Kevin followed up with, I mean, he gets it. Everybody gets it. I mean, $612,000 is a lot of money, but we got a lot of will out here, and we've only got $612,000 wallet, and it's going to go like crazy. So I mean, we can only do so much, and I'm just thinking, put it where it makes the most difference. Yeah. Hopefully, for God's sakes, we can get these kids back in a brick and mortar school sooner rather than later. Just my comments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So this is the slide before you is a breakdown of the funds. We're able to take 20% for administration. I think large part of that would go towards the administration of the rental assistance program. So we'd look at maybe breaking it down 70 for education, 70 for food support and service access, and then the rental assistance at 350.
May I ask another question? The 122,000 for administration, delve into that a bit.
We're allowed 20% of the supplement for administration, and that covers staff time. I anticipate that, or I would recommend that the 350 for rental assistance all go to rental assistance, and that would support anywhere from 100 to probably 250 payments, households. And so that would, at 20%, that would be a 70,000 for the provider or providers of the rental assistance program, and then the remainder with the city for our cost.
Well, who would be implementing this? The city? Is that what you're saying?
No, the city would put out RFPs.
Okay, so that RFP group, whoever who is awarded the contract, that administration cost would go to them. Is that correct?
A portion of it would. The city will retain some of it because we'll have cost involved in it, staff time, because we've got to monitor, process, pay, all that.
I'm a little confused there. Why would the city get more money? They're already being paid to do their job. Help me there.
Is it more work?
Well, I mean.
Well, it would lessen the general fund contribution to the CD program. So
okay.
we don't have to take the administration, but we're entitled to it.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Just a comment to Susan, for Charlie, when you asked about communities and schools, they have programs in every school in the city, and they do a tremendous job. But also, I just wanted to talk a minute about making sure that we put people back in homes, because a lot of folks may be, by June 1st, they may be kicked out, especially in some of those places where the landlord is going to take the rent up and things like that. I saw one statistic that said, like in Charlotte, 1 out of 4 people have not paid their April rent. So I think that's really crucial. And then the last thing I want to share is I understand what they're talking about with that COVID slide. What happens in the summer, kids always fall back, you know, now, and like Neil just said, we haven't had any real learning since March. So that means the kids are almost out of school for a whole half a year. So that's gonna be really critical as well. All right, thanks.
I didn't mean to lessen my opinion of communities and schools.
Yeah, I know
any of them.
you didn't.
They do a fantastic job. I'm just wondering how much more they can crank out, because there's a lot of kids out there that aren't being reached.
Yes, yeah, very much so. I agree with you, Charlie.
Suzanne, I'm back again. So with the 350,000 that we have for homeless prevention / intervention, on a previous slide, wasn't there a requirement as to how that money could be spent, like low income based? So at what rate are we gonna help 200 to 250 families potentially?
100 to 200.
Definitely not at market rate.
How it would work in concept is, or what we would ask, and this is, we looked at Charlotte's program a little bit, is the renter would have to present a copy of their lease, documentation of their income and loss of income, probably bank statements, and then a caseworker would work with them and would make the rent payment for whatever their rent is to the landlord. They might also try to negotiate with a landlord. One of our concerns is, and one of the things that we would put in the RFP is and look for someone who'd have the ability to negotiate with landlords, so that once they, go back and pay, say, their April, May, June rent, that's all that would be allowed, that they don't then just turn around and get evicted. So try to work out some sort of a plan.
Right.
But so the question is, the low to mod income is about what the person's, income is, not what the amount of rent is. We were just
Okay,
using an average of $1,000. We know there'll be rents, more than that, and less, probably not much less than that.
And you said a copy of the bank statement. So basically they have to have $0 in their bank account. And so they really, really, really have to be facing homelessness, not just the fact that they've been out of work due to this and they've been unable to make payments for their rent, like severe homelessness almost.
No, sir. They don't have to be completely broke, but we just need to understand, we would need to understand that there was not any income coming in that could have supported the rent payments. So
Okay.
you could have a situation where someone did lose their job, was able to get unemployment and the supplemental unemployment, and might actually, be able to maintain their rent and their living standard, even though they're unemployed. But then we know that there are many folks who haven't been able to access those resources. So that's why we would ask for that documentation. But when you're looking at, we're going to look at folks' tax returns and that kind of thing. So that's what we would use to determine if they're low to moderate income.
Okay.
Okay.
Suzanne?
Thank you.
Suzanne, can I ask a question? On the homeless prevention and intervention, we're looking forward, I assume, people coming to us for current and future needs, not reimbursing for past issues. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct. Yes. For homeless, for folks who are literally homeless.
Yes. Well, for example, we rented rooms during this. We're not looking at reimbursing ourselves for that.
I asked our HUD representative directly if hotel rooms would be allowed for reimbursement here, and the answer is no.
Okay, so it's not going to be looking backwards. It's going to be looking forward.
Correct.
Next month's rent or,
Okay.
For folks who are literally homeless, yes.
yes. Okay.
But, okay.
But for folks who may, because of the rent moratorium, are not evicted, but they haven't been able to pay their April rent, their May rent,
Right.
then it would look backwards.
That would be, look back.
Yeah, that
Okay.
would be eligible.
Okay, Susan, quick question. Is there like a standard form that we use that, other than use, or is it each city or county makes their own form?
Are you referring to an application for the assistance?
Application. Yes, ma'am. Application. That's what I'm referring to.
We are looking at some examples from other cities, and there is a standard form that we all have to use for HUD to collect eligibility and other kinds of data.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or directions?
I think, well, for me, Suzanne, you know this area best. I guess this is a good breakdown of the limited amount of money. It definitely shows that we're focusing on the homeless issue more than anything. But as far as service, access, and food support, I think we'll discuss some more about what we could or should do with the food bank sometime today and decide whether that should be included in our budget.
Susan, I like the homeless prevention intervention. I guess one of the questions I would be concerned about is after we help these people, let's say with their rent, these persons, what's the guarantee that the landlord doesn't after June 1st say, you got to be out of here? And I don't know if that's something that we could follow up on, but I worry about that. And then I also wonder, is there any assistance given to people, let's say, that are really undocumented? Like, for example, some folks that really lost out during this COVID epidemic. And that's my comment.
Yes, and I understand your comment and concerns. I will have to verify about undocumented persons. I'm looking at some information I have here. I believe they must be citizens of the United States. And of course, they must be located in the city of Wilmington.
Okay.
From some notes I've prepared here.
Thank you.
Suzanne, do you have I don't know what our time, if we're wanting to debate and decide this today, or if this is something you're gonna bring back a recommendation, or do you have, you have an outline of a recommendation clearly, but or some, not necessarily a recommendation, but some pockets that have applied and clearly have a good reason to do so. But have you got percentages yet, or do you think with this we ought to put 100,000 in this, 100 in this, 400 in that, or how far along are we with that? And maybe that's a question for Sterling. I don't know. What do we need to do today to give you guidance?
Thank you very much for that. So the process is no later than your June 16th city council meeting. We'll be bringing forward a resolution for you to act on a substantial amendment, to adopt or approve a substantial amendment to our current year plan that would then allow us to receive these funds. We'll also bring a supplemental appropriation ordinance that budgets the funds. Then we submit that to HUD and some other things through their system. So the funds are available to us. So I plan to bring that again to you at City Council. So and this is essentially the substantial amendment. So any changes that you want in this allocation, that direction would be helpful, and we can certainly, accommodate that. Some of the comments that I've heard, should we take the 20% admin? Do you fund education, or do you fund education at that level? Those are two things I think I've heard. If you want to provide direction to that, I certainly.
On the education piece, I mean, I guess I would be curious, and I know, I hate the way this will come across. I'm a big fan of a lot of those people. My question is, and I think you already, I don't remember who, but another council member asked you, well, I think maybe it's Charlie, but the reach we would get out of the money. In other words, the 70,000 kind of people, $70,000 going to reach 100 people or 2,000 people. I mean, that's kind of what and not that the if it's the lower of the two numbers I threw out there is a bad thing, because I mean it's hard to reach folks when they're not in a school building sometimes. So anyway, I think that I need to evaluate the extent of reach of the education piece.
Right. Since we would be issuing requests for proposals, we would then have to ask that question, and we haven't got to that point yet. Or if you had some standard or criteria.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
So that'll come
Yeah.
with it.
We did ask in our questionnaire if folks were providing new services or expanded their services, but we didn't get into that level of detail.
Okay.
We're really trying to fast track this.
I guess what I'm getting at is my guidance, just for me, not everyone on this board, obviously, but would be, when you get these proposals out, emphasis on reach versus depth. Does that make any sense? Like reaching more people for a couple hours a day versus reaching a smaller group of people for an extended amount of time. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
That way,
Yes.
we're at least, lighten that little bit of education fire and more people, some versus a few longer, if that makes any sense.
And I can try before this comes to council to have a better sense of that impact that you're asking about in terms of the number of students.
Can we're spending a lot of time on this, but let me ask one more. $122,000 for administration. I understand what you're saying, Suzanne, is that we have the right under the program to charge administration. But if we're not incurring additional costs, we're not hiring extra people. What we're basically doing is taking what would have come out of our taxpayers and to fund the department already. And we're saying, well, we're going to pay part of it out of this. If that's the case, I would be inclined not to take the 20% and see if we can get another $122,000 out for these programs. That's just my view of it. I don't think we should be funding the overhead cost on this money, if we can do it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Suzanne, didn't I understand you to say that only a portion of that would come to the city and a portion of it would have to go to the company that's administering the program?
Yes, that would be my recommendation, is that we not keep that whoever is administering the rental assistance program will have some administrative costs. Clearly, that's probably a fairly labor-intensive that's a pretty labor-intensive process, as you can imagine, with a case manager. So I would propose that 20% of the 350 be added as admin and not taken out of the 350.
I see what you say. In other words, that to the extent it's an outside agency that's administering it, we would pay them the administration fee. But I don't think, there's so little money here. I can't see us paying our own staff to administer it unless we're adding staff.
Yes,
Good
sir.
point.
And we're not proposing to add staff. So we could certainly move the remainder of that admin funding into any one of those categories.
Yeah, let's try to squeeze as much out of this as we can to get it onto the street.
Would it be best probably to put it in the food category?
I think that depends on what programs you get.
Okay.
I think that as we all know, it's really not a whole lot of money, but there are going to be a number.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate your comments.
Okay. Next, Mr. Cheatham.
Mr. Mayor, the next thing we want to share with the city council, because it also affects the budget that you're going to be asked to vote on June 2nd, is an update on state consideration of Powell bill, old gas tax funding. You provide you an update on that.
Good morning, Laura Mortel, the city's budget director. The following slides that I'm going to show you relate to the Powell bill discussions that are happening here as well as at the state level. I'd like to first provide you with just a summary of what the Powell bill really is. It is administered and funded through the state, administered through the North Carolina Department of Transportation, and it is formula-based for the municipalities, how we get our funding. And it's focused on two main aspects, our lane miles that we maintain, as well as the population of the city. Recently, it was directly tied to the motor vehicle fuel tax, and in recent years, it was changed to a flat rate appropriation at the state level. Funding is distributed to municipalities for street age projects such as, but definitely not limited to, resurfacing streets, constructing curb and gutter, drainage systems, and greenways. How we use the revenue goes towards our debt service fund and is considered to be part of the transfer of $9.3 million. And it is directly sent to the debt service to pay for streets and transportation financing. As we've discussed already today, NCDOT is projecting pretty significant shortfalls in this year as well as FY21. NCDOT is already beginning to deal with their shortfalls, and discussions are occurring at the state level of how they're going to be doing that, and it's trickling down to us that the Powell bill may be reduced between 15 to 25% in FY21. What does that mean for the city? The Powell bill is budgeted at $2.9 million for FY21. We're looking at a potential shortfall of $442,000 to $737,000. The funding is distributed in October and December of each year. That is key for us because if we have our restrictions, our financial restrictions and spending restrictions in place, we'll know the first half of the fiscal year if that funding is shorted to us, and we will be able to make corrections as required in the second half of the fiscal year. Hopefully the restrictions that we put in place of delaying one-time purchases and strategic hiring practices, as well as restrictive travel and training, will help us in the second half of this coming year. That is all I have on this topic. If anyone has any questions. I'm sorry?
So I guess it's just a wait and see. I mean, because that's a fair amount of money. Are we just in our budget? Are we already made which assumption did we take?
We have not made any assumptions. Staff is recommending that we wait until the second half of the fiscal year, but you're more than council is more than welcome to direct us otherwise. At this time, we have not been formally told we're losing that. State is still in session, and they are still considering all the measures that are in their play, just like we are right now. So we really don't know if it's going to come.
Have you worst case scenarioed it? I mean, like, okay, or pick a number, $500,000 doesn't come. How do we adjust? I mean, do we have?
Well, I think with our financial restrictions that we will put in place, we will be delaying those one-time purchases. So if we don't get that revenue, we won't be spending that money. So there's going to be a lot of that
Capital
money sitting, capital money. And if we are, if we have vacancies and we're strategic in that, we'll be saving some of that money in addition. So I think putting those restrictions in place and really, you know, following them the first half of the year is really going to help us with all of the unknowns of this environment.
Okay, thank you.
The next presentation, we are going to walk through some of the transportation initiatives, and Dave Mays is going to be doing that for us.
These will be items that are in the recommended budget.
Yes, these are items that are already in the recommended budget.
Takes you forward. Takes you back.
Thanks, sir. Good morning. As alluded to, we're going to talk a little bit about the transportation initiatives that are included in the budget. Based on some of the feedback that we got from council at previous work sessions, we've developed the following recommendations. The first one is an additional asphalt repair crew. This crew consists, at least this year, it consists of 3 full-time employees, a crew leader, and 2 workers that are funded for half the year in terms of their salary and benefits. In addition to that, that would include equipment that would allow this crew to do asphalt repair full-time. That includes a dump truck, a crew truck, a trailer, and a mini excavator to be allow us to get much more done in terms of asphalt repair maintenance on our roadways. The second item that is included in this year's budget is a shift in our street rehabilitation funding. We've taken $2 million from what was FY23, I believe, or 23 or 24, and shifted it to next year. Yeah, excuse me, FY23, which previously was forecasted for actually $0 in funding. Now with $2 million shifted in funding, we anticipate that we can get up to an additional 9 lane miles resurfaced within this next fiscal year with that additional funding. Again, this is not adding any money to the CIP. This is simply moving $2 million forward based on the debt model. The last initiative that's included in the budget is our pothole repair crew. Currently, we have 1 pothole truck, pothole patcher, and a full-time employee that operates that. This proposal will actually add a second pothole patch truck. That's one full-time employee to operate that. It's a $105,000 ongoing cost with a $223,000 one-time cost to actually purchase the new equipment. In addition, we're trying to accelerate the replacement of the existing pothole truck, which has been somewhat of a problematic piece of equipment. In addition to those operational transportation initiatives, the following staff members are also part of the this year's budget. They include a full-time fiscal support specialist with a full year of funding and a project manager at half year of funding. Both of those positions are in the engineering department and will assist with managing the capital project effort within that department. In addition to that, there's a senior budget analyst that is proposed half-year funding that would be part of Laura's staff that would also assist with the overall capital project program for the city.
Dave,
Yes, sir.
half year meaning the second half of the year, or are these vary, or this all mean the same?
It means that we would, in terms of the salaries, they would be available to us to start hiring so that they could be available on as early as January 1.
So that second asphalt crew, don't look for it anytime soon. It'd be January.
Correct. Any other questions?
Yeah, Dave, just a quick question. I heard you mention the truck is not doing well. So we do have money in there to repair that truck?
Yes, sir. The existing pothole truck that we have is getting up there in age. It wasn't quite at the age where it was scheduled for replacement. So we have worked to try and accelerate that replacement next year. So it's not a repair of the existing truck. It's actually to replace that existing truck.
Okay.
In addition to that, we have the second truck that would be a new purchase.
Okay, okay. Because you got to have a truck. I mean, no hiring people if the truck's not working.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Dave, is the truck, the problem you're having with the truck, is it the function that it does, or is it the mechanical part of the truck itself?
I think it's fair to say there's a combination. It's not a very typical type of vehicle. These are not very, these are very specialized, and some of the computer, we've had issues with the computers that run the machinery on the truck to do the pothole repairs. It's been a variety of problems, but going forward, we would have, as soon as the new truck comes in, we would have two trucks that are, essentially identical pieces of equipment. So we think that would be a much better operating stance for us, that we would have two operating at the same time. And if one's down, then we always have a second one that's operating as well.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, so Dave, you're not going to run the two trucks simultaneously. You're going to buy one to replace one.
No, sir. We would, if both trucks were operating, we would have staff prepared to operate both trucks simultaneously. I didn't mean to confuse you.
But if the old one breaks down when we have the new one, we're not working, is what you're saying.
Let me back up and clarify. We're buying a brand new truck and we're hiring a new person that is completely new in addition to what we have. We have a current staff member that operates the current truck. That current truck, what we're saying is that we are going to go ahead and replace that next year. So that when we get that purchase, we will have two brand new trucks. And we will have the staff to fully operate them simultaneously.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was confused and I didn't even know it.
Yeah, my apologies.
It's okay.
We knew it, Kevin.
All right, watch it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, it's about 10:30. You may want to consider taking a short potty break.
Okay. Let's take a 5-minute recess.